Is 90% silver even worth investing in anymore? There's a lot of people that absolutely wonder what has happened to the 90% silver market. 90% silver, for those of you who aren't as familiar with this particular area of the bullion market, is typically constitutional silver, United States silver coinage that was in common circulation up until 1964. In 1965, they stopped coining everything in 90% silver. There were a few years where they actually made some 40% Kennedy half dollars, but that only lasted for about 6 years. And then our coinage system, other than proof sets that were made specially for collectors, all of our coins other than that were just clad coinage, no valuable metal content and certainly no silver content within them. So that's what we're talking about typically when we talk about 90% silver is pre-1965 U.S. coinage. For a long time it was very popular amongst stackers and especially preppers. There's a certain percentage of the public that is concerned that there may be a time when our banks are no longer operating as they used to. Maybe even our dollar will become to the point where it's absolutely worthless, and yet you still have to buy and sell things. And so there are some people who think that it'll be 90% silver that they're able to make those kind of transactions with. I don't think they're right, but it is a possibility. I'm not discounting the idea that that could never happen. But there is another reason to invest in 90% silver, several others that I believe will cause a prudent investor to look at it, and especially during times such as this where the demand for this particular brand of silver has gone way down when the demand for other types of silver, 0.999 silver, has gone markedly up. And so I wanted to talk about that. Is it even worth it to invest in 90% silver? Well, a lot of it depends. I have some experience in this. If you have been able to buy and sell this particular type of silver or any type of silver through the years, you know that there are several outlets for it. Maybe your local coin dealer buys and sells 90% silver. Mine is Stout Safe Storage in Amarillo, and they have bought and sold 90% silver for as long as I've been in this part of the world, for about 30 years now. You probably will have a local coin dealer that's similar to that. The question is, will they pay you a fair price for it? And the way to determine that is to just get online and shop around at the various places that buy and sell 90% silver. There's some very big companies that do that very thing. They're advertising today, as a matter of fact, that they're buying 90% silver. But about 2 years ago, they were buying 90% silver at about $4 to $6 over spot. That didn't last for a real long time, but we remember those days, those of us in the silver stacking community, and those were good days to be able to cash in some of your 90% holdings, especially if you wanted to get something different, maybe U.S. Eagles or some other sort of sovereign minted coins or whatever it was that you wanted to get. But it was a very good time because 90% silver was selling for about $4 to $6 over spot. Well, that's kind of turned around, hasn't it? Now you can get maybe $4 to $6 below spot for that same 90% silver. And so should we continue to invest in that? The thing I want to point out is very often when we're talking about these premiums above spot or below spot, we have to look at both the buy and the sell points that our dealers are using. Because when our dealers were purchasing that 90% for, say, $5 over spot, well, they were selling it for maybe $8 over spot. And so there was about a $3 spread during that time. Now, fast forward to today. I've got several dealers right now. I've been looking at the different ones I've used through the years that are offering between $3.75 below spot for 90% to below $5 under spot. But still, they're selling that same silver for maybe spot to spot minus $2. And so the spread is still somewhere in that $3 to $5 range. The spread hasn't changed that much. And this is an important part of any type of investment. It's not so much what they're paying you around spot as it is what is the spread. What's the difference, in other words, between what it would cost you to buy it from this dealer and what they would give you if you sold it to that dealer. And if it's a reasonable spread, if it's somewhere along the lines of 5 to 10%, well, that's not bad. That's something that's pretty standard and has been standard in my experience for over 40 years now. And so this is something to keep in mind. Even though it's so far below spot right now, they're selling it below spot in many instances. And so it's the spread you want to look at. And the spread has not really changed. And so if this is what you're used to investing in, 90% silver, and you're worried about the fact that you're getting so much less than spot right now, remember you can also buy it for much less than you could just 2 years ago in relationship to spot. I want to talk about 3 reasons why there is this discrepancy from now and 2 years ago. Why was it $5 over spot 2 years ago, and why is it $5 under spot today? And there's 3 primary reasons for that. The first is this: the supply-demand in silver has shifted. 2 years ago, there was heavy retail demand. And before that, even during the COVID years, when people were getting sent checks from the U.S. government, they had extra money, and a lot of people put that extra money into silver. And so 90% silver got very popular at that time and remained popular for several years after that. And so it increased the retail side of it. Retail is just you and I going to buy any product, whether it's something like a precious metal that we're talking about today, or just going to Walmart and buying a pack of gum. That's retail. On the other side will be the commercials, the big boys, those who are buying and selling in huge quantities. Well, those who are buying right now in huge quantities, the commercial buyers, are doing so because they have something of a shortage as far as what they're able to get today. That doesn't mean that this shortage will last for any length of time. It doesn't mean that it won't. It just means that right now, silver is in shorter supply in big quantities, in 999 fine, than it has been in a number of years. And so even though the retail side, the demand has fallen, although it's starting to come back up a little bit in recent days, even though the retail side has fallen, the commercial side has just continued to get stronger and stronger. That's why you see silver over $50 an ounce right now. There's a lot of people acting as if this is a real problem that we have because the retail side is weaker, but you have to look at the overall picture. And the overall picture is that the commercials are buying, and they're paying significantly higher prices than they were just a year ago. And so this is to our advantage. Even if the premium that we're getting is a little bit less than we were, or even a lot less, we've still very likely made a fairly handsome profit on what we've purchased through the years. And so keep that in mind. There's a lot of retail people that are selling right now, but on the other side, on the commercial, there's a lot of people who are buying. And so even though we see even some coin dealers that don't want to buy things like 90% right now because they've got too high of an inventory, that doesn't mean that on the commercial side that that's the same case, and in fact it is not. Now this brings us to the second point. There is a lot of supply from the retail side, and that supply has to go somewhere. 90% is typically something that is purchased by the little guy, by you and I. Sometimes it's bought by bigger investors, but usually it's something that the smaller investor is interested in. Well, what has happened was so much of this has come in on the retail side for whatever reason. This has overwhelmed the dealers. They normally have a pretty good supply-demand system in place where they're selling about as much as they're purchasing. And in instances like that, they just handle everything in shop. When the supply is lower than the demand, then they'll buy from their wholesalers. But when the supply is greater than the demand for it, they typically will sell it back to the wholesalers or directly to a refinery. And the refineries have gotten so much of this material that it has overwhelmed them. And so anything that is fabricated silver, silver that is not 0.999 pure, but either 90% U.S. constitutional money or 80% Canadian money or whatever type of foreign older silver that you might be talking about, your grandmother's tea set, silverware, those types of things, they're a lower percentage of silver, and it takes longer, more effort in the refining process. And so a lot of refiners have just refused anything that is not 999 fine or nearly 100% pure, because they can just melt it. They can take all this 999, whether it's 1 ounce rounds or 100 ounce bars, they can melt it down, they can turn it into a 1,000 ounce bar that is acceptable to COMEX, and then they can sell it to the big boys, to the commercial buyers. And that's what's been happening of late. And because it's so much easier for the smelters to be able to take care of the 999 fine, they have stopped taking anything that's fabricated, anything that's a lower percentage of silver than that. Well, that's made a lot of people nervous because of that, and it has caused those who typically pay a very fair price for 90% to have to lower what they're able to offer for it. They're still paying a fair price, most of them. Some people take advantage. We understand that. Find yourself a good dealer, and you're not going to have to worry about that side of it. But again, because the refineries are operating at such a high capacity right now, they don't have to take in anything that's not 999, and most of them, if not all of them, have stopped doing that. And the third reason that maybe people should be considering is why there is more supply on the retail side. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is just the annual cycle. This is the time of year that people typically start getting their real estate tax bills. And a lot of people save for that in different forms. Some people save in the form of silver. I've certainly done that through the years. Well, when the real estate taxes come due, you take that which you've purchased for that reason and you sell it back. And so there's a lot of people that are doing that right now. The other thing is this: prices have gotten really high and people are starting to get pinched for funds. And so a lot of people who've been saving in silver are taking it back to the dealers now and selling it so they can pay their bills. And so the third reason is that people are just pinched for funds. There's other reasons as well. There are people like me who have a very specific buy and sell schedule, and when the price point gets to a certain point, they'll sell. When it gets to a certain point, they'll buy. And so that adds to it as well. But the three main reasons are the difference between the retail side and the commercial side, the problems that the refineries are having right now. Maybe not problems, but the difficulty as far as taking care of all the supply that's coming in. And then, of course, the third being that people just need money, and so they're having to sell. On the other side, there is good reason to believe that this will correct itself in the future. There have been really two great melts in the United States, not talking about the ones that occurred in the early 1900s when they were actually melting down silver coins because they were starting to take silver dollars out of circulation. But we're talking about the great melt that occurred in 1980 when the prices went sky high and people took advantage of that. There was a minor melt probably around 2011, 2012, but even though the prices were high, it was very short-lived and it was inconsequential. This one is consequential, and so it's very likely the first one that most people who are involved with precious metals have ever seen, unless they're as old as I am. These things tend to straighten out. Just as 90% silver was selling for $5 over spot and is selling for $5 under spot, now you're going to see that that will switch. just supply and demand, the natural cycle of that will take care of part of that. A lot of 90% has been melted down. So when the demand on the retail side increases, and it typically does, you're going to see that there is less of a supply of 90% than there was prior to this last great melt. And since there's a lower supply of it, it could increase the demand. So you might see those commission ranges start to tighten a little bit, maybe even in your favor. The second reason is this: there will come a point where the refineries are able to take fabricated silver again, anything below 0.999, and it will become economically feasible for them, just as it was just about 3 or 4 months ago. And there will be several reasons for that. One, they'll run out of the supply of the 999 silver. People will stop selling that, or those weaker hands that were intending to sell it have already sold it. And so at that point, when the refiners start to slow down as far as the supply they have of the really good stuff, the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit, they'll come back to the 90% again. I'm pretty confident of that. May not be right on that. I don't have a crystal ball, but very likely just that natural cycle will take care of itself, especially if the big commercial buyers continue to buy, and that always is critical, isn't it? If their demand slows down, the prices are going to come down in every area. And so don't be surprised if that happens. But if their demand remains high, there will come a point where the refineries run out of the 999 silver to refine into the 1,000-ounce COMEX bars, and they'll be looking for the other types of silver. And so that could certainly bring those commission points back into a more normal range for that. And then, of course, there's just the seasonal factors. This time of year is when people pay their real estate taxes. After this will be Christmas. This is a time that the retail side typically slows down a little bit, but in the spring it usually picks up. Will it do that again next spring? Who knows? But it's not unreasonable to think that it might. And then when it does do that, those spreads, again, will start to close. They'll tighten up, and you'll be able to hopefully sell your silver at closer to spot prices, maybe even a little bit over, as we have in the past. And so these things all go into it. There's a lot of people who panic. Maybe one of the other incidental reasons that the 90% has gone down so much is when people see that it's going down, they panic. And a lot of people will trade it in at the very worst part, at the lowest price for 90%, and they'll trade it for something like Silver Eagles, which right now are selling at $5 plus over spot. Even though you've got a $10 range in that, people still seem to like to follow the herds on that. And so that, I believe, could balance out too. But I think that's one of the reasons 90% just is not popular right now, and people like to follow the popular herd. And so I imagine there's a little bit of that as well. Will this continue indefinitely? Well, it never has before. Can it continue for a long time? Absolutely. Could we have a huge financial crisis that will cause the value of everything to go down? And certainly that could happen. But in the long term, silver, gold, any type of precious metal, any type of commodity, especially those that are non-perishable, typically go up over time at a reasonable pace. We have seen a lightning pace in the last several months, and that has caused some of these anomalies that we've seen, especially in the 90% silver market. I'm not panicking on that. As a matter of fact, I'm taking advantage of it to buy more 90% than I am the 999 because it looks like it's on sale to me right now. I could be wrong, been wrong plenty of times in the past, but again, in the long run, I probably won't get too hurt with that. And you have to make your own mind up on that, but maybe this will give you some ideas, if you haven't really been looking into it very closely, as to some of the reasons why 90% is not in as high of demand now, but it may be in the future. Well, appreciate your tuning in today. Let me know what you think in the comments. I appreciate your watching today, and I hope we'll see you again next time.